Americans are the people I truly serve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. Today, the 9/11 deep dive with Adam Fitzgerald. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. We dive deep into a lot of this stuff through a lot of these episodes, but this is one of my favorite ones to record, so I really think you'll like it. I really think you'll get into the information that we're spreading on this one. If you're like me, you like BBC, and there's nothing like a BBC in your mouth. So if you want the lingering flavor of a BBC in your mouth, go to foxandsons.com. Foxandsons.com is where you will get a very nice smoked chocolate BBC in your mouth. Go to foxandsons.com for your big, bold coffee. And if you sign up for an order of more than $20, you'll get 15% off if you use 0 as your code. So go to foxandsons.com for a great big, bold coffee. That's your BBC. Put it in your mouth. Maybe let it linger there for a little bit. Let them know that you've come around because of year 0, and use the code 0 when you make any order over $20 for 15% off at foxandsons.com. That's Fox, the letter N, sons.com for your big, bold coffee, baby. RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a shitty libertarian. He's a shitty person. He's a shitty business owner. And he's a shitty graphic designer, which is why he needs your charity at RyanBunting.com. Go to RyanBunting.com and give him all the charity you can give him, because Ryan Bunting is a starving artist. He's a shitty artist, but he's a starving artist. So feed that fucker at RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. LibertarianInstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Kyle Anzalone, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Dave DeCamp, Will Porter, Kim Robinson. All of us motherfuckers are all over at the libertarianinstitute.org. Every once in a while you might run into a Jim Bovard or a Ron Paul. But go to libertarianinstitute.org and enjoy all of the content that we are creating for you over at the libertarianinstitute.org. It's for you, by us. Because you couldn't do it right. No, I'm just kidding. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and check out all the work we're doing, because we're working really hard over there. So, libertarianinstitute.org. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. All right, part 4 with Mr. Adam Fitzgerald, or part 5, I'm sorry, with Mr. Adam Fitzgerald. I just got done doing the audio edit on part 4, so my mind is
you're stuck on part. No, yeah. Hey, what's up, Tommy? We're up.
What's going on, man?
I can't believe we're up to part 5 already.
Yeah, we're flying through it.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to find another subject to do this again.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much more to branch out from here.
Yeah, exactly. So who knows where we're going to end this. I mean, we might just go for a while.
We could just keep going. Yeah, sure. like you know what, 9/11 is unlike any other past event like JFK or RFK and uh, Jonestown or the Gulf War. 9/11 seems to, and this is from my experience in studying 9/11, is that it branched out to so many other areas that actually were indirectly or directly linked to the events itself.
Mm.
And so much has happened after 9/11. So many, people say, well, so much has happened on 9/11, but so much happened afterwards, and it's a byproduct of it,
Right.
which leaves me, in a state of awe. But going back and trying to connect the dots to 9/11 in itself, I mean, there's a lot that we didn't talk about so far,
Yeah.
and we're already up to 5 parts, and we're just basically just scratching the surfaces here. And that was the whole basis of my podcast too, The Dark Hour. Me and my co-host Richard Cox, we made a series that's not very popular at all, but we made a series called the Road to 9/11, and it was basically I think it was 14 months and it was 18 parts. And then we did The Dark Hour after that because we wanted to talk about the intricate anomalies involved with pre-intelligence and even after 9/11. And I'm up to 63 episodes already.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Well, and
There's
you
so
have some
much
really
more.
good interviews on there. I haven't listened to all 63 of them, but I've listened to quite a few of them, and I've enjoyed every one of them. Every one of them, I'm like, oh wow, this is great. I'm getting something out of all of them.
Yeah, I got lucky. There was a couple of people there that were hard to reach, but after some pestering of mine, and some I guess they learned to trust me a little bit because I don't fly off the handle in terms of off the fringes, but I also tend to push the envelope when it comes to the official narrative because whatever that official narrative is, and it's usually always something different when I ask somebody that is. There's also people who are whistleblowers of agencies that got in trouble because they tried warning the United States about what was happening and they were just ignored. And when they violated their code of ethics because nobody was listening to them, they're the ones who got arrested or got in big trouble by like the FBI or the CIA. John Kiriakou, he didn't do anything wrong. He just blew the whistle. He just went on national TV and told them about what was happening with the torture and rendition program, and they freaking arrested him.
Yeah, well, and
charges.
I mean, he gets called a whistleblower, and I have a lot of respect for John. I've had him on my show before. I enjoy talking to him. One of the things about John, I'd look at it was kind of like the way he said it, like in the interview, it was kind of off the cuff. It was just kind of like, yeah, everybody knows this, like,
yeah, right.
Yeah. It really seemed like he didn't even think twice about saying it. It wasn't like he was like, okay, I'm going to get in some shit for this or anything like that. He just was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what we were doing, and so it really kind of seemed kind of casual. I don't even know. Maybe he knew at the time that he was blowing the whistle, but his mannerisms, the way he approached the subject, he didn't act like it that he was saying anything that he shouldn't have been saying.
Right. No, and like at the time it was public because ABC actually reported on the memo that was written in November of 2001 about how to define who was able to define an enemy combatant, which means terrorist. And usually that's the Department of Justice. But in November of 2001, I forgot the exact date, but John Yoo and David Attenborough, Cheney's own personal lawyer, he's a White House legal counsel who actually rewritten a memo which defines enemy combatants by the President of the United States. So in other words, in the future, like it doesn't have to pertain to just Arab fundamentalists.
Yeah.
The term itself is so vague, it could be labeled anybody.
Right.
And that's the danger of these memorandums and legal memorandums that are basically left up for open interpretation because it could be used anytime in the future. If the president doesn't deem you as somebody on his side, he could just label you as an enemy combatant.
That would never happen. We've never seen that.
No. I've always said that the example was January 6th.
Yeah.
And that's just a small example because I think that
Assange
in the future. Yeah, exactly.
You
Look
know,
what
I
we
mean,
do to Yeah, with media, especially with people in independent media.
Alex Jones, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I got lucky with a couple of these people, and that they build my reputation up with the Dark and Dow, and um, I don't know when I'm going to stop there because I'm always learning something new regarding 9/11. Right now, it's Operation Encore. The follow up to Pen Bomb, which is the FBI's investigation into the Saudi financing into the 9/11 hijackers. And I've done five actually new videos about Operation Encore that I'm just learning, and these should be all over the news, and they're not.
Yeah.
That's because the State Department still protects, the interests of the Gulf, and of course, the fringe aspects of the 9/11 truth movement. They don't touch it because, they don't believe in hijackers and don't blame Arabs for 9/11. But if they look at the bigger picture, it's not just about Arabs. It's about who's handling the Arabs, who's managing these Arabs, and who's actually monitoring them, and why didn't they do anything to stop them? That's the bigger question to look at. Then you get into, the greater geopolitical angle and neoconservatism and Israel and Saudi Arabia and how they managed to benefit from these attacks, because look what happened after 9/11. And we invaded all the countries that are supposedly preconceived enemies to the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia.
Well, and a lot of this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, though we're not going to get to Operation Encore quite tonight. But that will be a future episode. I do want to get into that because I know absolutely nothing. I know that there were lawsuits that the FBI blocked against Saudi Arabia under the Trump White House. And so other than that, I'm really kind of like in the dark on Operation Encore. So I'm gonna be learning all this stuff as the audience is learning it. Unless I go listen to your episodes, which I might do. But we wanted to talk about anomalies tonight, which is going to open up a huge door, for a lot of the other subjects that we're going to get into in the next few episodes. So, there's so many, like we were talking about the possibility of a mole and the speculation on the possibility of a mole, and the anomalies was kind of what we were going to do tonight, and what we were going to dive into. And there's so much stuff that you look at and you're like, well, this doesn't really make sense. Like you have the passport issue or whatever, or Building 7, for example, and the way that it came down, like it looks suspicious, at least, like if nothing else. Right. And then you had the money that was missing in the Pentagon, the part of the Pentagon that was actually hit by a plane was the accounting portion that was supposed to be investigating this, what was it, $21 trillion or however much money it was that had just gone missing. So you have all these different things going on. Where would you like to start this? Because there's so much to dig into.
Well, why don't we take it in chronological order? So let's take it from the reverse. So you talk about the Pentagon itself, about the 2.3 trillion that was
2.3 trillion. I knew I was wrong on the number. I just
no, you were right there. It just happened to be a decimal short. But let's talk about that, because that's really important. Because from my experience online, this is one story that basically got misconstrued a bit, and it was through a lot of these documentaries and films that wanted to push that there was something much more nefarious going on 9/11. And I agree with the premise that there was something much more nefarious, but this ain't one of them. And I'll try and make sense of it. Now, allegedly, the story goes, but well, it's not alleged, but the story goes by fringe circles that Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, basically went on. He was at I forgot where he was. He was at a promenade for the military, and he basically brought up the story about the Pentagon accounting offices that can't account for $2.3 trillion in the budget accounting offices. Now, the fringe theory is that because Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon and hit the accounting offices, that the people who were in charge of that money were all killed and the investigation is dead. And this $2.3 trillion was never properly accounted for and the money goes missing. Well, it's not necessarily what happened. So what happened is that if you go to the Associated Press and you look up an article dated March 4th of 2000, and you'll see that was written with the headline called Pentagon's Finances in Disarray, and it was written by John Donnelly. And basically, the Pentagon money managers were making adjustments of nearly $7 trillion in the decade of the 1990s. And so what happened was that in 2000, the Pentagon's budget accounting offices made almost $7 trillion adjustments to their financial ledgers in an attempt to make it add up to the money that was spent. Now, one thing that, no one's a stranger to is that the Pentagon is one of the biggest waste spenders on the face of the earth. If they have to buy a bomb or 10 missiles and they basically store it somewhere in the United States and just stays there, basically that's called waste spending. But what they do is you have a different amount of different types of offers by the military. Say the Army needs a surplus of 1 million bullets. The Navy needs a surplus of about 6 warships, and the Marines need about 10,000 shoes or whatever. Everything, even the smallest detail.
The IRS needs 87,000 agents.
Yeah, exactly. And they have, but they have to bring it to their supervisors and their superiors, and they have to make sure that what they need is not overspending, and it's they're really needed. And usually they get what they need. The military never hears the word no more often than not. Now, the Pentagon, when they were adding up this money, they couldn't show receipts for $2.3 trillion of that $7 trillion adjustment. And so the Defense Department's accountant attempted to correct the discrepancy. And if you don't know how the Pentagon works, Pentagon is much like the FBI back in the 90s and the early 2000s, is that they're very dinosaurish or very primitive in their technology, as opposed to like the Defense Intelligence Agency or the NSA, which is really up to date. So is the CIA, right? They're up to date technology. Pentagon and the FBI, these gumshoes, like these old hats, they basically use these, like the Pentagon has hundreds of computer systems to run accounts. And so each computer system will run account for healthcare, one for payroll, one for inventory, one for manufacturing of certain military arms and whatnot, but they're not integrated. So if there's a discrepancy in one computer and there's a discrepancy in the computer for another issue, basically what happens is you'll have an audit. And at the end of the audit, they basically say, well, this didn't add up, and this didn't add up, and this didn't add up. And so what happened with the $2.3 trillion was that it was $2.3 trillion that each one of the computers, or a various number of computers, didn't add up when it comes to the audit of the Pentagon's spending of the 1990s.
So they didn't have like an intranet where it just automatically updated the central database. Okay.
Right. Now they do now. But that wasn't the case back then. That wasn't the case. So while the Pentagon Budget Accounting Office was investigating, this $2.3 trillion, September 11, 2001, you had the hijacking of Flight 77, and it crashed into the Pentagon Budget Accounting Office, where they were investigating the non-allocation of funds. But the fringe theory is that, the investigation ended, no, everybody got away with no, but the money wasn't stolen. So in other words, if Donald Rumsfeld basically like stole the money because he's the Secretary of Defense, or that, he stole part of the money. Why on earth would he ever announce it the night before when he knows a plane's going to come in and destroy the Pentagon Budget and Accounting Office, basically having him get away with a crime?
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to say, is that it doesn't really make sense for him to announce it. Now, what happened to the investigation? Well, it's no longer $2.3 trillion. Now it's $15 trillion. So we have a lot more that's not allocated, that's probably never going to be fully accounted for, because the Pentagon spends so much money. And especially, why has it jumped so much? Because look what happened after 9/11. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Pakistan, Sudan, you name it. We went to war, or we had countries that go to war and we supply them military armaments and bullets and funding and whatever. And you know how much money we spent? God sakes, Afghanistan was just $3 trillion alone. So yeah, that's a lot of money that's basically not allocated for. And I just wanted to clear that up with that one discrepancy.
My theory on this, all the spending overseas, whether it's sending $60 billion to Ukraine or however much they send to Israel. So here's my theory on it. I don't know how read up you are on economics, but the way I look at it is, what they're doing is, if that money were in the United States in rotation, inflation would be off the charts. We would never be able to keep up with it. Instead of deflating the currency, they want to keep the United States currency as the world currency, right?
Right.
So what needs to happen if you want the United States currency to be the world currency? You need other countries using the currency. So all that excess money that you're printing, if you send it overseas and get it out of circulation, so it doesn't affect inflation, you're killing two birds with one stone, right? You're keeping inflation down, and you're keeping other countries dependent on the United States dollar. And so I think that's what they're doing. I think that's why they don't pull the money out of circulation whenever the funds get too large. All they do is they send that money somewhere else. And as they send it somewhere else, it kind of balances out the inflation and keeps the products here in the US from getting out of control as far as prices go, keeps hyperinflation in control, and it keeps other countries dependent on our currency.
Well, see, that's a real conspiracy if you think about it, because the reason for the destruction of Libya was that the Muammar Gaddafi basically wanted to not depend on U.S. dollar, but
he was going to create his own African gold currency that he wanted to trade oil with. Yeah.
Right.
And Iraq was doing something similar as well. So, I guess.
Right.
So
the real anomaly regarding that story, which is basically not a non-story. The 2.3 trillion is nothing to snuff at, because basically it's more. $2.3 trillion, by the way, is basically more than the entire federal budget, and it's the reason why I'm like, everybody would know about this, and basically you can't just steal $2.3 trillion without everybody freaking noticing it. And not only that, the real conspiracy, or the real anomaly to look into, is basically why are we spending so much, and why are we gross spending? Not so much that, someone's stealing this money, almost like, going to a store and just basically stealing with a bag. No, it's like, if we start questioning about why we're spending so much on military armaments, basically we'll start, really holding people accountable for waste spending and overspending on conflicts that we shouldn't be in. So that's the real conspiracy or anomaly that we should be really talking about. But, unfortunately, that's one anomaly that went under the radar, or basically ignored altogether in the months and years after 9/11. That's why they got away with the.
Well, be careful the kind of challenges you put to my audience here, because I have a bunch of blue collar rednecks that listen to this show, and as soon as somebody heard you say you can't just steal $2.3 trillion, they're like, fuck that, hold my beer. And they're fucking on their way. They're,
sure.
You're going to get somebody killed.
Yeah, but I want the one thing, like I'm very anal when it comes to conspiracy theories, because you have rational conspiracies and you have fringe, and I try to be a little bit, I guess kinder. I could say kooky or conspiracy, but it's not very. I want to try and reach that audience.
Well, the thing is, and you and I were talking off air last week, and we were chatting back and forth. And the thing is, there's something here to be concerned with. There's all this money that we have no accounting for,
right?
And people are inserting a narrative into this that doesn't belong. It's like,
right, exactly.
Let's just focus on what the issue is. There's a problem here. We don't need all this excess stuff. And it makes you start wondering if this is like some kind of psyop or limited hangout, or, or like these, or is this person a Fed? Like, who is this guy like saying all this crazy shit, because you don't need all that crazy shit to say, hey, the Pentagon can't account for $15 trillion. That's an issue. We should fucking do something about that. Exactly. You don't have to go any further than that. It really, you don't, there's nowhere else you need to go. If you can get an investigation started and they find, some corruption or something like that, then yes, then we know that. But I mean, why insert a narrative when there's already, you have everything you need? You have the Secretary of Defense coming out and saying there's $2.3 trillion we can't account for. Okay. What else do you need? You don't need to say anything else. The timing is suspect. I get it. Like it's kind of a shit. It's kind of shit timing. I get all that, but you don't have to go any further than that. You don't have to insert narrative in order to make $2.3 trillion a lot of fucking money.
Sure.
I mean, it's a lot of money.
No, exactly right. But the reason why I'm so critical of certain people in the 9/11 truth movement is that, if you want to talk about conspiracy relating to 9/11, there's so many, but you don't help yourself by basically inserting over the top theories that basically blanket the real theories involving, malfeasance or even complicity. And that's something that I'm so careful. One thing, Tommy, is that when I first started engaging with the public in viral media, I was very naive. I didn't think that there was so many outlandish theories involved. And to my like 6 years later, here I am still like in shock at people that don't believe like planes actually were hijacked, or that even further that the planes were actually holograms. Or, to me, that's astonishing. Like that people like be that ignorant, or is it something more? But I think it's basically the horrifying reality is that, we do have an ignorant percentage of the public that basically has instituted themselves as truthers or in the truth movement. Now, this is not a charge on the whole truth movement either. This is a very loud, small percentage of people in the truth movement who unfortunately have been the public's attention for the last 20 years.
I think something like you have to realize, it's something that took me a while to realize. And because I talk about like the WEF, I talk about ESG, and there are kooks out there that talk about this stuff. There are people that don't look into it like real strongly, or they jump to conclusions. They're trying to insert like different dialogues. I try to stay with what I can prove. I try to stay within parameters and walls that I'm like, okay, I can get here. I can't get to that next step. It doesn't mean that it's not true. I just can't quite get there. Like, I don't have the evidence. And so I try to like follow the evidence, and wherever that evidence leads, then I'm like willing to talk about my Substack. I send out things on transhumanism and stuff like that all the time. Right. But I think what you witness, and it took me a minute to figure this out, because I was like you, I was like, where's all this coming from? This is crazy. Like, what is this? Why are you doing this? Obviously, when it comes to questioning government, the government has an incentive to make you believe what their narrative, right? And so if they can make the people that are questioning them sound totally insane and lump you in with some kind of insane people, then they'll do it. But other than that, there's enough distrust of the institutions of government that people are willing to believe these things. And it's kind of like a mirror image of the government, right? What you're seeing is you're seeing people go so extreme outside of what we can prove evidence-wise, but they're going so far that what they're doing is they're holding a mirror up to the government, because the government is doing so much and going so far outside of scope of what we think they should be doing, right? So it's kind of like this whole mirror image thing that we're witnessing. And it sometimes you just got to step back and go, I see where you're coming from. People aren't going to listen to you. And the people that are going to listen to you, you don't want listening to you. You know, and so I'm not mad at you because you're following this rabbit trail. What my thing is that you're going further than you have to. Where does the evidence lead you? Where does the evidence stop? At some point, you go from evidentiary, like, narrative to speculation. Where's that line? We need to draw the line there and stop there, because we do have some sort of responsibility to those people that listen to us to be like, hey, look, I'm not a total fucking nutcase. I'm not going to lead you off a cliff.
Yes, and this is the reason why I'm so happy that you're doing this series, is because we need more platforms who are responsibly taking responsibility in the information that they're sharing to their audience. Now, you know, it doesn't benefit you to basically have a disinformed or misinformed audience, but basically a lot of people will do this for either relevancy or for profiteering, or just basically to make themselves think that what they're imparting is actually information, because it basically goes against the narrative of the federal government whatsoever. One thing I hear about with the fringe community of the 9/11 unit that they call themselves the truthers is that they'll basically say that the official narrative is false. I hear this all the time. And I always say to myself, what is the official narrative to these people? And generally to them, and this is from my experience, you know, it's not the official definition, but to me, the official narrative to these people are that 19 Islamic fundamentalists hijacked 4 planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and into a field in Shanksville. And that World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 came down from fire. That, to them, that is it. That's the whole narrative of the 9/11 Final Commission report. Now, I have read the report. I'm probably the only person in the world, and that's not an exaggeration, to upload the entire commission and the Joint House Inquiry on their YouTube channel. C-SPAN has it on their channel, but I'm the only person on YouTube that has it in full. And what I want people to do is basically look, and I'm not trying to reach an audience that basically is educated on the matter. I'm trying to reach the people that I was once part of, and that is the fringe, misinformed audience. Because what good would it do me to reach an audience that already knows? So these people basically have never read the report, because there's 14 chapters. And that's just basically a small microcosm of what is in the report, because there's so much in it. And more importantly, there's so much that was left out. So instead of saying it's an official report, it's basically an incomplete report, because exactly right, you know, there's so much information that's not in the report that basically was omitted, and, you know, certain things were classified. So, right. and we're just learning more and more. So I wouldn't say it's an official narrative. I say it's an unofficial narrative. It's an incomplete narrative. That's what I would tell people. But yeah, I'm not one, because I know that the planes were hijacked and they crashed when they crashed. That doesn't make me a defender of the official narrative, because I actually talk about the anomalies that the government actually covers up.
Well,
So
let's get into more of those.
yeah,
Let's dig into all of them. Let's do this. Let's lay it
please.
out because we're we're bitching and we're going to do an episode on
I
all
know.
the myths and the lies around 9/11, and there's a lot. And
Yeah,
so we're gonna get into that stuff. So let's continue along the path of the anomalies because I'm ready to get to the mole, man. I want to get to
okay.
that.
Yeah, it's the more alluring story, isn't it? So
Hey,
yeah, this is
speculation's always fun. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if we
it
have
always that's
if
great.
we may not have 100% evidence, but it's a fun story.
It sure is, especially when it's like when it's teetering on, hey, wait a minute, this makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not irrational speculation, but I'm careful enough to like basically tell people, hey, listen, what I'm about to tell you is speculation. So
Mm,
yeah, this is one of them, and we talked about this in our last episode, but we're off air, and I guess I just gave you the general rundown of what I'm working on, as well as my co-researcher, DJ Thermal Detonator, Nelson Martins, also. Ryan Dawson has talked about this. He's from A&C Report. He's also brought this up. Very few people actually have. And so the story goes like this, is that um, United Airlines Flight 93, alleged by the FBI in the 9/11 Commission report, says that four men hijacked this plane, which was taking off out of Newark Airport and supposed to land in San Francisco. And the alleged pilot hijacker is Ziad Jarrah, and the muscle hijackers are Saeed Al Ghamdi, Ahmed Al Hasnawi, and Ahmed Al Nami. Um, they all got on board the plane, and they took over the controls of the plane, and the passengers fought back, and it basically Ziad Jarrah nosedived the plane into a ground in Somerset County known as Shanksville. That's what the 9/11 Commission report states, and that's what the Pent Bomb report, the FBI investigation into 9/11 states. But that's not what may have not have happened. And so I'll try to make sense of what's going on.
okay.
So basically, what happened was during the hijacking of Flight 93, and this is what caught my attention to it, is that there were more phone calls of Flight 93 than were on any of the flights. I think it was like 30 something phone calls, 2 or 3 made by cell phone, the rest were air phone. And I listened to 6 of those phone calls, 6 phone calls. There were 2 from flight attendants, 4 from passengers. And they basically said to their loved ones or whoever they were talking to, say, by the way, we're being hijacked, and that there's 3 hijackers on board the plane that we see. And 3 of these people basically point out that the 3 men were also very dark-skinned males wearing red bandanas on their heads. And so I looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. It was supposed to be 4 on this plane. And there was 3. And so in 2006, because Flight 93 was the only flight where the cockpit voice recorder survived, and this is really important, the cockpit voice recorder, the audio was actually played for the victims' families who were at the trial, and they basically heard it in a room, and the audio is not, it's actually classified, but it was played for the victims' families. They heard the whole audio. And the transcript, however, is public. And if you look up Flight 93 transcript, you can get it. And at no point in any of the transcript, you see the name Ziad. And if you look at the very bottom, and I want to say it's like at the 110.11 mark, you have a person sitting next to the pilot. And he's basically saying Saeed up down in Arabic, Saeed up down, Saeed up down. So what was happening is he was telling the pilot to shake the plane because the passengers were revolting. So they were using the food cart to break into the cockpit. Now on audio, the families heard that because you can hear the food cart rolling, and they're rolling back and crashing, rolling backwards and crashing. So and basically there was another plane. The FAA basically notified this plane's, I forgot the name of the plane. The guy that was on a plane was like a farmer or something. And he said, hey, sir, do you see a plane next to you? And they were trying to track it. He said, yeah, it's making herky jerky moves. Like it was going side to side and up and down, trying to shake off. So the plane does crash into the field in Shanksville. And investigators scourged the area. And so what they found was a burnt passport of Ziad Jarrah, very burnt. And they also, that's not what's really important. What they found was of equal more importance that nobody talks about is there was a business card. And it was belonging to an uncle of his named Assam El Jarrah. And it was a business card of his uncle. And on the other side of that card is the address of 54 Marienstraße, Germany. And if that sounds familiar, we did talk about that. That's where the members of the Hamburg cell stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of the name, on top of the card, it had Ramzi bin al-Shib's phone number. Interesting. So, the story doesn't end there. Why? Well, in 2011, something very odd happens. An arrest has happened in Lebanon. School teacher. You're basically saying, well, that's not a big deal. Well, Hezbollah basically made the arrest along with Lebanese local authorities. And the arrest was for a man named Ali Al-Jarrah. Ali Al-Jarrah is the cousin of Ziad Jarrah, the hijacker of Flight 93, the alleged hijacker of Flight 93. And if you're still wondering, why is this still news? Well, they found out through intense investigation and interrogation of Ali Al-Jarrah that Ali Al-Jarrah was a spy for Israel for 25 years, in which that he actually sent information to the Israeli military Mossad regarding his infiltration of the group Hezbollah. And there was an infamous assassination of one of Hezbollah's top lieutenants, Imad Mughniya, who himself has a very nefarious background with plane hijackings and other operations that go to the Abu Nidal organization, no less. Nevertheless, the CIA and the Israeli Mossad had found out where Imad Mughniya was, and they drone strike his death. And one of the very few people that knew where he was at that time was Ali Al-Jarrah, and that's how the Lebanese Hezbollah group and the authorities basically, put two and two together, and they investigated Ali Al-Jarrah and arrested him. Well, the story doesn't end there. Ali Al-Jarrah had help. He has a brother named Joseph Al-Jarrah, who basically helped him spy for Israel for 10 of those years. And the story doesn't end there. His uncle, as I mentioned, Assam Al-Jarrah, basically, and this is through Der Spiegel, German article, publication, did an investigation of their own into Assam Al-Jarrah. Assam Al-Jarrah actually was a member of the Abu Nidal organization, the terrorist organization headed under the infamous Abu Nidal. And basically, not only was he a member, but he was also an intelligence asset for Libyan, German, and Israeli intelligence. So here's where speculation begins. I don't think Ali Al-Jarrah was on that plane on Flight 93. And that would make sense with the phone calls that were made on that plane. And if you have one, maybe two phone calls, I can understand. But 6 phone calls, with 2 of those from flight attendants that they didn't see 4, but instead they saw 3, would line up with the other phone call, wouldn't line up with the other phone calls that were made on the other flights. With 77, they said it was 6 instead of 5. So there might have been more on that plane. But what happened? Well, you're asking, well, if Ziad Jarrah didn't get on a plane, how did he get his boarding pass? Because he did have a boarding pass, and he was seen with a boarding pass. Yeah, this is the question. And I don't totally say he wasn't on the plane, because the only thing that makes me say that doesn't dismiss it totally is that we do have audio from the plane, and it's Ziad Jarrah's voice saying, we have a bomb on board, so please sit in your seats. And he does make 2 announcements on the plane. So I don't say that he wasn't on the plane at all. I still don't think that he was on the plane. I don't know how that audio would be played. And I'm trying to work on whether there was a recording being played on the plane somehow. I still don't know that. But I don't think that he got on the plane. And I think that he was the Israeli mole that the CIA wanted for all these years. And that in Cofer Black, the head of the CTC in 1999 for the CIA, basically was horrified at the fact that the CIA still didn't have a mole within Al Qaeda. And in 1999, the Operation Jawbreaker began, which was the war on Al Qaeda and Bin Laden. And so they built up these base stations near these training camps in Afghanistan. Ali, so Ziad Jarrah, I know we talked about him in a previous episode where we talked about the Hamburg cell.
Yeah, we talked about him last week.
Yeah,
and one of the weird things about him is that he wouldn't share a room with any of the other hijackers.
Right.
That he was intent on being alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up. Is that how does this make sense? Well, if you look at if you listen to the previous episode, you'll notice that I did mention that Ziad Jarrah at no point ever did he ever live with any of the hijackers. At no point ever did he ever live with the hijackers, even while they were in Germany. And at no point was German authorities ever mentioned seeing him at the Al-Quds Mosque in Germany, in Hamburg, except for two things. One was the photograph of Saeed Bahaji's wedding, and the other was a video of him and Muhammad Atta at the Tarak Farms in Afghanistan, which doesn't have any sound. That is the only evidence that we have that Ziad Jarrah was with these hijackers, besides the muscle hijacking team at the Days Inn Motel 2 days prior to the September 11th attacks. But even then, he didn't get a room for all of them. He got a room for himself and a room for them. So why would he want to live alone? Well, if we speculate that he was a mole, that he was in Israeli intelligence, wouldn't you want to be alone to meet with somebody that you're not supposed to be meeting with, or calling somebody that you're not supposed to be calling, and relaying information about the operation and how close they are to achieving it? And that even up to the day itself that he goes to the Newark airport and basically gets his ticket punched to make sure that everybody gets on the plane, everybody's on the plane, and then he doesn't get on it. Meanwhile, they get on it, and the operation goes to plan. And they have to make sure that the operation goes to plan, or this whole operation was for nothing. Because the operation, what's the point of all this? Well, what happened after 9/11? Well, who benefited? Well, the United States federal government certainly did. Well, certain elements of there within, especially the neoconservatives. Israel certainly did, because we went to war with the Arab countries that they consider enemies in the Oded Yunnan plan. If you ever read the Oded Yunnan plan, it talks about the destabilization of certain Arab countries. One of them was Iraq. The other one was Libya. The other one was Lebanon, Iran. What was the Paul Wolfowitz doctrine? It was the doctrine in which they wanted to destabilize Iraq. What was the Bush doctrine, which was just basically the similar doctrines of Paul Wolfowitz? What was the Project for New American Century? All these foreign policy guidelines basically benefited certain countries, and they were the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, but more so the United States and Israel. So you better believe that, in order for this to be capitalized, that this operation, the planes operation, had to be successful. Remember what it says in the Project New American Century, that in order for this to facilitate quicker, they need an event similar to that of a Pearl Harbor. What they needed was a new Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. Well, 9/11 was that operation, was that event that precipitated all of these foreign policy guidelines that were written years prior. And so you don't need to add any more fringe conspiracies to it. Here we have just a whole bunch, and I just named two. So that's just two anomalies that I cared to mention.
So, all right, here's kind of where my mind goes. They have a recording of him speaking to the passengers on the plane, telling them that there's a bomb on the plane. I don't foresee at that particular point in time them recording that and putting it on a loop or anything like that. I would think that would be some evidence that he was actually on the plane. So let's say he did have ties to Israel, yet he was still on the plane. Like both things are true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what would that tell me? I could see a possible scenario that he's working both sides. That he's a double agent of sorts, I guess you could say, and that he is working Israel on behalf of Al Qaeda. All right. And so this to me makes a little bit of sense.
Okay.
Because this is something I brought up the last episode, was how did they know that there were going to be the operations and the training courses going on 9/11? Like, they needed somebody with that information to choose the right day. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So they were doing all these FAA operations and safety courses and training for hijackings on the morning of 9/11 when the hijackings actually took place.
Sure.
All right. So if you have somebody that's involved in Israeli intelligence or the CIA feeding that information to Al Qaeda knows what day to choose to do the operation, because they will fly under the radar.
Sure, but you could also get that information even before, many years before. So in other words, like the NSA, we're listening to the phone calls of bin Laden's satellite phone in the house in Yemen. Now, who's to say that the planes operation wasn't talked about on those phones? And if they got that information in, say, 1999, they can make the necessary adjustments in order for the operation to be successful. For example, having airplane exercises like Vigilant Guardian, Global Guardian, Amalgam, Virgo 1 and 2, and basically make sure that the needs in NORAD basically are just distracted and can't interfere with the plane's operations on time. That could be another scenario that we could take into effect too. If you believe that the World Trade Centers came down by bombs or explosions, well, if you knew about this operation ahead of time and you knew that the targets were to be specified, because according to Ramzi bin al-Shibh and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, taking a grain of salt, that they mentioned about the attacks in the year 2000. So that's plenty of time to basically make sure that the towers could be outfitted for whatever you believe that brought it down. And also, too, the make sure that the plane security is basically compromised by having people working in, like, say, prepping the plane, for example. Now, one story, this is not actually fringe conspiracy, this actually is true, is that there were other planes that were outfitted with weapons, even with the hijacked planes. It's alleged that on Flight 11, somebody got shot on the plane, Daniel Lewin, an Israeli Sayeret Maskaral, a terrorist combat soldier, basically was shot by a hijacker named Satam al-Sistami. This was in the American Airlines draft report, but they basically they basically said, well, he wasn't shot. Well, there were other reports of knives on planes. Even in the days after 9/11, when they took away the took off the plane restrictions, September 13th and 14th, they were finding bombs underneath the seats of planes, tape on the back of food trays, knives and box cutters. So there was other found weapons. In Flight 93, the FBI found knives, long knives on the planes itself.
Right.
And so, it is, who put these weapons on these planes. And I told you about the story of Eric Gill on September 10th. Were these guys basically going to put weapons on these planes? It very well could be. We don't know for sure. But yeah, these anomalies could basically show that the intelligence services may have had foreknowledge. That's what I'm alluding to, is that in order to, if you have foreknowledge of an operation, you can manipulate that operation to where it becomes successful for you to capitalize on.
Oh, okay. So you're basically theorizing that they had foreknowledge of when these attacks were going to take place, and so they just made the conditions acceptable for the operation to be.
Sure.
to go through. Okay, so what I'm saying is, let's say they had foreknowledge that there was an operation being planned, but they didn't have the exact day, right?
Mhm.
All right. So from the other way, if the NSA and the CIA and the DIA knew about the planes operation, but they didn't have the date for the planes operation.
Mhm.
And so they're training to defend against the planes operation. The fact that the planes operation happened in the middle of them training to defend against it would tell me that there's a possibility of somebody inside one of these agencies feeding information to Al Qaeda.
You know, that's a very plausible scenario, because we've had this before once, and his name was Ali Muhammad. Ali Muhammad was actually a triple agent for the CIA, the FBI, and affiliates, and Al Qaeda
Right.
affiliates.
Right.
And he was feeding information to all three, and basically he was involved at some level with the 1998 East Africa bombings, because he took pictures of the embassies and gave them to bin Laden. He basically trained a lot of the people that were involved with the 1993 World Trade Center bombings and the Landmarks bombing plot. And he was giving them information because he was actually a soldier, the U.S. Army out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So, I mean, it very well could be possible that your scenario could be a very reasonable speculation. I would take note of that, by the way.
Yeah, and that's all I was saying. I was like, maybe the mole is acting the opposite way of where your mind is.
Right.
Like, it's possible that the United States had this information. The NSA, the CIA, the DIA, they had this information. They're taking action to protect the United States against this operation, and somebody leaks the information of when they are going to be like doing these training operations, so that you can confuse the training operators by incorporating the actual attack during the training operation.
Exactly. This way, you don't know who to trust. So
exactly.
Right. Exactly. You don't know where the leak is coming from.
Right. And it also makes the United States look guilty for attacking their own citizens.
Exactly right. And that's exactly the point of the fringe conspiracy mindset, is that, the United States government will kill its own citizens.
And they will.
That to be true. And they will. Exactly right. It's not too fringe to think about that. Right. Because look what they consider. Like, they killed 1 million people in Iraq based on lies, and they got a lot of people to believe it.
Right. So, and both of us were alive when Waco happened. Right. Like, so it's
really right.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Right. Exactly. For those that want to say, because you all have debunkers that basically say, the United States won't do that. Well,
bullshit.
Exactly. You need a history lesson to show you. I mean, but it's not too fringe to think about that. But I like that scenario you bring up, Tommy. It's something that does cross my mind, but I never really gave it too much thought. But that's a very reasonable speculation in itself, that there could have been like a double agent working both sides of the field there.
Right. Yeah. Because I'm trying to look at how the U.S., like the intelligence agencies, viewed this whole scenario and the actions they were taking. And I'm looking at what they were doing. And if you remember, like, the coverage and the when they were being questioned, they were very shaken up, like, and they're not actors, like,
right.
And so if they were trained actors, then I would maybe be like, all right, like, I don't know to trust this guy. Right. But the fact of the matter is, I can not trust these people and still say, I think they found themselves on the short end of the stick on this one. Like, they got
right.
You see what I'm saying? And so, because I understand, I kind of have a basic understanding of how the CIA operates. NSA, not as much, DIA, not nearly as much. It's really hard to find information on either of those two
Right.
agencies. So, but the CIA, at least, I've done a lot of investigation, research, and reading on the CIA and their operations, the compartmentalization, the way they use this. When it came to the questioning and the answers that were given, the way that they were addressing the subject, I never got the feeling that these guys were in on it, right? Or had enough knowledge to stop it. Now, I know Thomas Drake says that if every agency would have coordinated their information, they would have been able to put it to bed. But I'm just speaking like, due to the fact that they weren't sharing information, they were competitive against each other, they were trying to compete with each other, they weren't acting as a single unit, which was a big mistake. And so that could have created this lack of information, where you have a piece here and a piece there and a piece there, but you're never putting the puzzle together because you don't have all the pieces in the same arena. And so I'm looking at it from that angle going, okay, Drake says if this would have happened, they could have stopped it. But they were competing against each other. They were looking at each other as competitors, not as on the same team. So what does that lead me to believe? That leads me to believe that they thought they were doing the right thing. They were taking the actions that they thought they needed to take to stop what was coming, right? As sick and demented as some of these people are, I don't know if I'm willing, and it's been a really hard thing for me to like come to terms with, is like, a lot of these people in these intelligence agencies, in the Department of Justice, in the Department of Defense, are sick people. I mean, they're twisted. Yep. The way they view human life, this, that, and the other. So I guess it's not beyond the realm of possibility to question whether or not they would do that. But it's like, okay, from what I've seen, from what I've witnessed, from the stories I've gathered, I am at come to the conclusion they knew something was going to happen, but they didn't know when or what, right? And so if they didn't know when or what, then how is it coordinated on a day that they're training against what they knew was going to happen? And that's where I'm kind of coming from. It's like, just, there's a lot of people that question whether or not they were involved or allowed it to happen or whatever, but I don't feel like there's enough people questioning, like, okay, let's say they were trying to stop it. Was there somebody involved in the CIA, in the NSA, in the DIA, in the FBI that was in this position that would feed that information to Al Qaeda so that Al Qaeda knew what day to plan the attack?
I mean,
it could have been the FBI agent that was living with the Al Qaeda members. I don't know.
I mean, you're talking about Abdus Sheikh, who rented a room to Khalid al-Mihdhar al-Hazmi. But you would have to have, in order, like, what is the primary function of an intelligence service? To collect information, to obtain information, to protect the security and safety of American civilians.
Well, no, interest. Not, at least not the CIA. I can speak only for the CIA. I don't know what the central theme is for the NSA or DIA. But when it comes to the CIA, their purpose, their central purpose, is to gather intelligence to feed directly to the executive office. Because when Truman created the CIA, he was getting a lot of mixed messages from military intelligence. So he wanted an intelligence agency, an intelligence arm that worked directly for the executive, that only answered to the executive. So the Central Intelligence Agency, is their entire project is to gather information to give that information to the executive. Now they've gone way beyond that, and there's no arguing that. So like if they're doing something outside the realm of what they're intended to do, then I mean,
right.
that's not unheard of.
Right. No, and you'd be right about that. But I'm just being naive and coy about this. Is that, you know, information that would actually benefit the people itself in general.
Okay.
But the thing is that when you obtain information, whether you obtain it through closed means or through public means, that information makes you a powerful entity. And you know, some of the most powerful agencies on the face of the earth are intelligence agencies. And you can manipulate operations and projects before they even happen. And you know, this was the big stink regarding the 1998 East Africa bombings, is that we had information that probably could have prevented it. You know, I did a podcast basically talking about pre-intelligence that could have basically stopped the bombings itself. You even had somebody from the an affiliate that knew about the operation of the bombing itself, and he walked into a CIA station office and told him, you know, I'm Egyptian, I know about this operation. The first thing they did was to report him, right? So 9/11, well, we had an abundance of information that could have prevented this. Now, you mentioned Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA. Well, you know, we also had the CIA. And, you know, God sakes, I did 3 episodes basically talking about the intelligence that they had that could have definitely prevented 9/11. But in that case, it's even worse because they intentionally withheld that information from being shared with the FBI and even to the State Department itself.
Right. And that goes back to what I was saying about them competing with each other and not working together.
Right, exactly.
And that was even going on within the agencies, right? Like there's been this thing that which makes this is what makes it so hard to find out things about what these agencies are doing, is because each division of the agency is compartmentalized. We talked about this in the first episode, because one of the things I found interesting was whenever you go back and you read on the old operations, right? And you're reading on these different characters, and you're reading about Alan Dulles, and you're reading about James Jesus Angleton, and you're reading about all these different characters that were very interesting people and very intelligent people. And you're reading about how they went about it, like with MK Ultra or something like that. And it was basically like they would get a demand from the head of the CIA, and he'd be like, I want you to give me as much information on this subject as you can get me. And then they were kind of set free to do it however the fuck they did it. And they did some really crazy shit to people in order to do this. And so this is where you get projects like MK Ultra or Operation Mockingbird. It's not necessarily coming from the top. What it is, it's like a Sidney Gottlieb gets it in his mind, like, oh, you want to know how this works? In order to give you that information, I can do this to get me there. And so Sidney Gottlieb comes up with this whole project that he's like experimenting with drugs on people or whatever. And Alan Dulles, though he is the head of the CIA and should be held accountable to an extent, he didn't know what the hell was going on. He didn't know what Sidney Gottlieb was going on. He had like James Jesus Angleton in this corner over here planning the assassination of JFK. He didn't know what the hell was going on, you know?
Right, exactly.
And so that's where this and that's when you look at the history of like the CIA, and again, I can't speak for the DIA or the NSA near as much because I haven't done. Number one, you can't do as much research. There's not books out there about these guys. It's hard to find anything on these agencies. They're very secretive, much more secretive than the CIA. And so what I found is you had the same thing going on inside the agency that you see going on outside the agency with 9/11. You have these competing interests and these people trying to leverage, their own personal agendas against each other and not working together and creating this whole compartmentalization. And it was originally done intentionally because then you can, I don't know, I didn't know. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
right.
You have plausible deniability then, but it turned into this corrosive like cancer that's working within the agency, and the agency reflecting that amongst other agencies also corrodes that whole intelligence dimension in the Justice Department. Sorry, it's just kind of my rant there because I never get to talk about this stuff.
Right. No, it's understandable. I mean, but it's relevant. It's relevant to part of 9/11 story, and also you talk about compartmentalization within the agencies. There's also what needs to happen in regards to when these agencies collect information and they collect intelligence, and they know that an operation is about to take place, an operation that is in a criminal fashion, that there has to be a level of plausible deniability within the highest levels of government.
Yeah.
And you talk about George Bush and, how like George Bush or maybe Dick Cheney, that they wouldn't have to know every detail 9/11. Yeah, I agree, because they're out in the public. They're bound to talk to news media and whatnot. You don't want them to know every detail, but maybe they might know like when an attack is going to take place, but they don't know the time and the place or where it came from, who. But you just know they're safe in regards to an attack is going to take place in a specific area. Don't be at that area. But as for like the technical specifics of 9/11, very few people would have to be in the know about that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
only very few people would have to be known about that. But that it would have to take place within, say, NORAD in order to make sure the planes are diverted away. But very, very few people would know about the very minute specific details of 9/11. Everybody
this is
else,
this is kind of veering off the subject just for a second, but I think this is important to note. Last week, was it last week or yeah, it was last week, on Patrick Bet David's show. He's a very popular podcaster, and he does some good shows, no lie. But he had a former CIA agent on there named Philip Mudd, and one of the things that Philip Mudd said was, "Oh, well, I was in the CIA for 20 years, and no operation that we ever took part in didn't leak out into the public. That's bullshit. That dude is fucking lying. That dude is fucking lying his ass off. We all know that 30 years down the road, we find out about Operation Mockingbird. We find out like this shit doesn't fucking leak out because of the compartmentalization, because of the plausible deniability." And he's saying that there's no way the CIA was involved in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Okay, go read Confessions of an Economic Hitman and then tell me that there is absolutely 0% chance that the CIA had anything to do with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. You fucking lying piece of shit. Do we have proof of it? No, but don't say there is absolutely 0% chance and that it would have leaked by now. What do you mean by now? It happened 2 days before your fucking interview, you fucking lying piece of shit. Sorry.
Exactly.
I get that off my chest. That really bothered me when I saw that. I was like, millions of people are going to see this fucking clip and they're going to fucking believe this fucking lying motherfucker.
Yeah, no, I mean, God's sakes. But you're absolutely right. As long as you have a number of people who are away from the very specific details of an operation, well, they won't be able to speak about said operation in any specific context with, say, the media or the public. So there you have that level of plausible deniability.
Right.
Even though you know a crime is going to take place, you just don't know when and where and who. That's all.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that drove me crazy when I saw that clip. I was like, I wish there was some way where I could like just tap at, like, hack into this and like cut him off and be like, he's lying, motherfucker.
Yeah, he's lying. Right. Well, it's bullshit. I mean, for God's sake, we hear about operations maybe 50, 40 years down the line.
Exactly. Like Iran Contra, it never happened. Like,
exactly.
You're telling me that if it weren't for the investigations, it would have been found out. Like that somebody would have leaked it, but it wasn't 2 days after it happened
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Like
Right.
this was years later. Like you're sitting here saying, well, it's been 2 days since the pipeline was sabotaged. There would have been a leak. Like there's no secrets in the
Right.
CIA.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
bullshit. All the CIA is secrets, man.
Right. The NSA, there's a joke about the NSA, never say anything. That's what
Yeah.
they really mean.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
the joke about the
absolutely.
NSA. Yeah.
No, I
So
mean,
yes,
shit, how many people didn't even know the NSA existed until after 9/11? And it had been around since the 70s, and nobody even knew it was there. Shit, I didn't find out about the DIA until Trump was impeached. I was like, what the fuck is a DIA?
Yeah.
What the fuck is this shit? I was like, holy shit. You mean they
Another
get even
great-
more covert than the CIA? Who knows what kind of fucking operations these motherfuckers are doing?
Yeah, exactly right. I tell people about the Utah Data Center. You know about that place?
Yeah.
Yeah. And people look at me with doe eyes and they go, oh, what is that? Is it a sports arena? And I tell them, no, it's actually the NSA's warehouse building. It's a building that's filled with hard drives and giant monolith hard drives. It's all your phone numbers and text messages.
All your metadata.
Yeah,
that's where it all goes.
That's right.
Did you hear what Michael Bolden said about that? When he found out about it a few years ago? You know what Michael Bolden is, right? From the 10th Amendment Center?
Yes.
All right. So Michael Bolden had this idea. He's like, all right, so like the NSA sets up this whole database inside of Utah that uses like, I think it was something like 16 million gallons of water a day to cool the servers and the hard drives. He's like, just elect somebody who will turn the water off. just vote to turn the water off. And then the NSA has no more water to cool their servers. They can't collect metadata. I was like, wow, that's a hell of an idea.
If only if it was that easy.
Right. But he was making a point about decentralization and how it works and how like you could utilize decentralization to get the federal government under control. He's like, if they can't cool their servers and their hard drives, then they can't operate. They can't collect metadata. So,
right.
Cut off their cooling solution and they're SOL. They're up shit creek without a paddle,
Yeah, for sure.
That was kind of his idea. What was that like in, he said that, I think that was in like 2017, 16, 17, somewhere around there. He said that.
I think that's funny. Another story about the Utah Data Center, day one, when they first opened, it used so much electricity, it knocked off half the electricity of the state of Utah.
I believe it.
Yeah,
my air compressor kicks on and my electricity blinks. I believe it, man. Those guys, who knows what the hell they're doing?
Yeah, who the hell know what they're doing over there? You can't get in. Nobody's allowed. The public's not allowed to go there.
But the people in Europe can't use natural gas to heat their homes because that's bad for the environment.
How dare they?
Yeah.
Greedy bastards.
No shit. Right. All right. So anomaly number 3. Let's get to another one here.
Yeah. There's another great anomaly about 9/11 is the additional hijackings that were going to take place. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. And, I made a podcast a long time ago.
I'm already like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah. No, there's not.
I don't disbelieve you. I'm just like, wait, I haven't heard this.
Yeah. I made a podcast a long time ago. It was in 2020, I think, or early 2021, called The Attempted Hijacking of United Airlines Flight 23. And so what happened was that on the day of September 11, 2001, a plane that was supposed to take off out of JFK and land at LAX, much like flights 11 and 175, but they were taking off out of Logan. This one was supposed to take off out of JFK. And so the plane was on the runway. It was just about to take off. And then all of a sudden they got word about United Airlines announced that they would all their planes were to land and not take off. So any planes that were in the air, they were to immediately land at the nearest airport or landing strip, and any plane on the runway would have to go back and taxi back to the base station. And so Flight 23 was just about to get ready. They were actually authorized to take off, but they went back to the gate So a flight attendant actually went back and radioed to the passengers saying, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're going back to the gate. We are not taking off due to events of what's happening in New York. So while she said this, 3 Arab men actually got up from their seats and started yelling at her about how they need to get to their destination and to fly. And so they're arguing with her about taking off. And, she's saying, I'm sorry, but we're not allowed to fly and we're going back to the gate. And they're arguing vehemently with her. And so much that she actually, informed security, hey, listen, I think there's 3 men, they're acting very strangely and aggressively toward me. So when they got to the gate, they basically deplaned, everybody got their luggage and they all left. Those 3 men, they actually went to the crowd, mixed in the crowd, and they left. However, when security got to the gate, they got to the plane itself. They looked for these 3 men. Of course, they're long gone, but they left their luggage, their carry-on luggage, and their luggage in the plane. So when they looked at the carry-on luggage, and in the carry-on luggage, they found in one parcel, they found a pilot's uniform, a box cutter, a knife, and an Al-Qaeda training manual.
Oh, shit.
So they basically said, all right, this is not a separate operation. And then when the first officer and the pilot heard about it, they basically were bad. When they heard about what was happening in New York, they actually forgot to mention this. They actually barricaded the door with an axe can, and they threw furniture in front of the door, so nobody could get into it. And basically, when they deplaned, they saw the furniture up in the front, and so nothing became of this story until September 13th, when they lifted the travel ban of the planes. And when they did that, at JFK and LaGuardia, and the only one person that I know that reported on this was Nelson Martin's DJ Thermal Detonator, and Paul Thompson of the Terror Timeline, and also HistoryCommons.com creator, basically reported that over 50 people were arrested at JFK and LaGuardia, either having weapons on the plane, having a bomb on the plane. Basically, one was dressed as a pilot, and basically the 3 people that were on flight 23, well, they got arrested because they were trying to get on a future flight, and they basically were detained. And the one person was dressed as a pilot. And in his identification and everything, they found he was a relative of the Bin Laden family.
There was rumors, and you may know better than me if this is true or not, but there was rumors that there were supposed to be 10 different flights. And, and only 4 took place.
Yeah.
So this flight 23, that looks like number 5. Were there 5 others that were stopped?
We'll never know, because it was never really fully investigated.
Oh,
So the FBI basically came up with the story that 4 planes were hijacked, and that's what we're going to go with. But that doesn't make sense, because we do have other instances of potential hijackings and weapons on other planes, and we do have other people that were arrested and detained, and basically looked like they were going to hijack other planes on September 13th and 14th. But the FBI basically closed those cases down, and basically all those people, just like with the Israelis and Saudi intelligence, they too were here on expired visas and didn't, they were all let go and deported. So they weren't fully investigated, what I'm trying to say, by the FBI for maybe their roles in additional hijackings. Now, Zacharias Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker that was arrested in Minnesota, in his trial, he basically said, and remember, he wasn't tortured. He basically acted as his own counsel and basically said that he was initially going to be in the initial wave, but then found out that he was relegated to a second wave of attacks. And if that sounds a little bit too peculiar, well, Bob Graham, the co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry, he said that he found out information that there were going to be additional hijackings other than the 4 hijackings of the planes. So there was going to be a second wave of attacks. Now, you mentioned about 10 planes. Well, the original story, remember, takes us a grain of salt, because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was tortured. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had met with bin Laden in 1999 and pitched an idea which came from the Bajinka plot. And that was to hijack 10 planes and have them crash all over the intercontinental United States. And that bin Laden said that he would think about it. In the second meeting, when they met, bin Laden said he agrees with the operation, but he can only probably maybe get 4 to be involved, 4 planes. And so they chose the targets. The targets were the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and the White House and the Capitol. They, that's the one thing about Flight 93. They didn't know what target, but basically it was either the White House or the Capitol.
Right.
It didn't matter, but they chose these targets, a year and a half in advance, 2 years in advance before 9/11. So that's another anomaly that a lot of people don't talk about, is that we have additional hijackings that may have taken place. One for sure about United Airlines Flight 23. That was definitely not a separate incident.
Yeah.
So who were those guys? Were they Al Qaeda? Were they somebody else? Another related to this incident, Flight 77. Actually, on September 10th, was there were 4 men from Qatar that basically were going to get on this plane, and it was alleged that they were going to hijack it, but they got cold feet, and that they left. And I think the New York Times the New York Times and San Diego Tribune basically reported on this. It was a big story at the time. And basically died in the vine, because the next day, the Flight 77 was hijacked anyway. There was another story on September 11, 2001, and I always forget the name of this flight. And I think it was a Delta Airlines flight. I'm not sure. Nelson, don't be pissed off to hear this, because he's the one who reported on this big time. I do have a spotty memory. I can't remember everything. But there was another flight where there was 2 Arab men. They were looking in the plane, and this was reported by the passengers. And that this plane landed in Cleveland, actually. I think it's a flight 1989. That's right, it was 1989. Delta Airlines 89 or United Airlines, it was 1989. And the people got off the plane and they, told the media about what they saw. And there was these 2 Arab men, and they were looking in the plane. They were looking around very strangely, sweating. They were acting very nervous. But on the plane, there was a lot of servicemen from the military there. It was like 10 or 15 of them. And they basically, it was alleged that these guys were going to hijack that plane as well. But it wasn't a hijack, actually. It landed in Cleveland. And people got off the plane, and they were talking with media, because the media they said, 1989 was a potential hijack. And it was initially reported by the FAA that it was a hijack, but it wasn't, actually. So the media ran there, and they started talking to the people, and they said, yeah, we didn't know what was going on, but we did see 2 Arab men on the plane acting very suspicious, getting up, looking around, looked like they were looking for somebody. Maybe somebody that was supposed to get on the plane with them, and they just had cold feet and left. We don't know. But yeah, there was a lot of potential hijack.
Well, and then there was there was that instance of the underwear bomber. Remember that
Richard
guy?
Reed. Yeah, Richard Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened.
That was a few months after 9/11, though, wasn't it?
It was Heathrow Airport, I want to say, where he gets caught and trying to light his shoe on fire.
No. This guy actually got into the air and his underwear caught fire.
Oh, the underwear bomber. Yes. Damn, you're killing me. Because I forgot his name, and that's gonna kill me.
But this was a few months after 9/11.
Yeah, he tried to light his underwear on fire. Right.
Yeah. Well, it was supposed to explode, and it just basically caught him on fire, and he had 3rd-degree burns all over his crotch. Yeah, exactly.
I looked it up. I had to cheat because it was going to kill me if I didn't know. I'm that way. So Umar Farouk Abdul Matulab. He basically was called the underwear bomber. What a name. It happened. He's called the Christmas bomber because it happened on December 22nd.
Oh, okay. I knew it was a few months after 9/11. I couldn't remember exactly when it happened.
And actually, it wasn't a few months after 9/11. It happened on December 25th, 2009.
Oh, was it that long after?
Yeah, it was 2009.
Damn.
Yeah,
I didn't even realize it was that long after.
He didn't even kill nobody. He got 4 life terms of 50 years, and he's an 80X Florence, actually Supermax.
Yeah. Did they ever prove he was affiliated with Al Qaeda, or was he just sympathetic trying to make a name for himself?
I believe that he was actually implicated to be involved with Al Qaeda, but it wasn't proven.
Yeah, I didn't think it was ever proven.
Right. It was,
I think basically you got a guy who's just like, oh, well, this is some way I can get attention, you know?
Right. So he was involved, like he was in Yemen. So he may have met with Anwar al-Awlaki, maybe.
Right.
But it wasn't like, proven that he swore bayat, which is officially loyalty to bin Laden and Al Qaeda.
Gotcha.
You have to, you could say you're Al Qaeda and you could be in the Arabian Peninsula. But if you don't swear bayat or loyalty to that leader or to bin Laden, you're not part of Al Qaeda.
Right. You could just be sympathetic.
Right. You could be a sympathizer.
Yeah.
Right,
so
exactly.
You want to talk? I've alluded to these like drills they were running the morning of September 11th. You want to touch on that and like tell people what that is? Because I think that's a subject that not a lot of people are really familiar with what was going on there. And I keep saying it, and I'm just kind of like brushing over it because I don't have all the details. I just remember hearing about it, and I'm like, well, that was odd. Like, why? I remember hearing the FAA wasn't sure if they were supposed to actually act or not act, if it was part of the drills, part of like what was happening. So could you kind of brush over that? Because I find that to be anomalous. Like, it's just an oddity that just everything all happens at one time.
Yeah, this is sure it is an oddity itself.
Yeah, it's just like it's too coincidental to be a coincidence.
Too much. It's just too much. And you would be right. Your suspicions are definitely warranted because I'm very suspicious of this. So on September 11, 2001, there was a number of different military exercises from the United States Strategic Command and the Air Force Space Command in NORAD. So they acted in accordance, running these different drills. Drills like Global Guardian, which is basically an annual training exercise, which is sponsored by the United States Strategic Command. Global Guardian, which was actually a joint exercise involving NORAD and the Air Force Space Command. So a lot of these, and also Amalgam Virgo 1 and Amalgam Virgo 2. A lot of these exercises varied. So you had one exercise that simulated Russian airplanes coming into intercontinental United States. You had one exercise where a plane was being hijacked and it was filled with bombs. So you had different exercises for different scenarios and different venues and different agencies involved. So what this did basically was have a lot of our depleted air defense as is, because we didn't have much in the way of air defense after the Cold War, because after the Cold War, we basically downgraded air defense space in the United States because we really didn't have an invading enemy that was really a threat at the time. And basically Arab terrorism, they don't have a standing military. So a lot of these air defense units basically were downgraded. So we have Otis Air Force Base, we have Stewart Air Force Base, and we have Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado running, operations on September 11, 2001, running these exercises. And so a lot of these exercises simulated what was going on September 11, not directly simulated. Amalgam Virgo 1, for example, if you ever Google it, you'll see a picture of Osama bin Laden on it. And basically talking about hijacking of airplane, because bin Laden back in the late 1990s actually told an Egyptian affiliate that he was to hijack his own plane and crash it into the palace of Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt at the time. There was also a threat matrix warning in 1998, 1999 to the National Security Council, headed by Richard Clarke, that Al-Qaeda was looking for a plane to buy so they could fill it up with bombs and crash it into the White House, where Bill Clinton was the president. So there was these threat matrix warnings about having planes filled with bombs and whatnot. So all these exercises did was basically distract air defense from interfering with the hijacked planes itself. And by the way, when the hijackings were going on and the FAA and NORAD knew about it, the exercises still continued. And they only ended when all the hijackings ended. That means the planes crashed. So when Flight 93 crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the exercises finally ended. And if you thought that was too much of a coincidence, that itself is like, wow, why? Why didn't they stop these exercises and have those planes go back to their bases of origin, get weapons or fuel up, and basically try and end or try to interfere with the hijackers themselves? Those are all good questions, because those questions were actually raised by the 9/11 Commission, in which NORAD went into the 9/11 Commission with a false timeline of events of the hijackings and NORAD's timelines and interfering with the planes itself. All of the time, the whole timeline was false. And
I
Richard
remember,
Benveniste.
I was just going to say, I remember seeing an interview with a guy from the FAA that was working during that period, and he was saying they were calling in a hijacking, and we're asking, like, is this part of the operation or is this a real hijacking? Like, we didn't know the difference between the two at the time. And so when the planes started crashing into buildings, we didn't know how to act, because we weren't sure if this was actually happening, because like our radar's lighting up, but our radar was intended to light up because of these operations that we were running. And I'm trying to remember. I can't, there's no way I'm going to remember the guy's name. I just remember saying, I think it was, James Corbett had done an episode on the operations around, on 9/11, and that, it was from one of his videos, on the subject.
Right. Yeah, you're not far off, by the way. When the FAA heard about 175 being hijacked, I'm sorry, a Flight 11 being hijacked, the FAA got in control with Command Center, National Military Command Center, basically said, we have a problem up here. We have a flight that's basically not responding. We think it's a hijacking. We need military to scramble up. And the guy basically says, is this real world or exercise?
Right.
And the guy says, no, this is a live event, not an exercise. And basically the FAA still were trying to find out whether Flight 11 was hijacked. Meanwhile, you have the MCC, National Military Command Center, as well as NEADS, Northeast Air Defense, basically scrambling, trying to get, planes in the air, but they don't know where they're going, because when these planes were hijacked, they turned off their transponder. Now, that doesn't mean the plane disappears from the radar. What happens is the plane is a radar blip with information on it that comes with the blip, like, say, the altitude of the plane and where it's going and the serial number of the plane. When the transponder's turned off, all that information is gone. But if you have a spotter who's looking at the radar and he looks at the blip, yeah, he can know it's Flight 11, but you never know. There's 1,000 blips on the screen because these are all planes. So it's very hard to track. You have that too. And on top of that, when these exercises were happening, you have these fake blips that were on the screen as well that were portraying all these planes that didn't exist, that were part of the exercise. So that added to the confusion of the FAA.
Right.
So while you have the FAA basically confused at what's going on and basically trying to give a timeline for NORAD to get up in the air and basically go where these planes are going, but they don't know where these planes are going because they're not part of the operation of the hijacking. They don't know where this plane is going. They can only know what airspace they're in. And, needs, they basically need to know what plane it is, where it's going, how, what altitude is it at. And so all this information is very valuable. It's a matter of seconds, not hours, seconds. So, and not to mention, they still don't have a shoot down order at this time. So the shoot down order came from the president at 10:39 a.m., well after all the planes were hijacked and crashed.
Right.
So, that's what happened with these exercises, is that they caused so much confusion. And that's probably the whole idea of why these exercises took place. is that you'll have confusion not just on needs and NORAD, but also with the FAA as well. Because I just did a video or a follow-up video, or I call it a breakdown video regarding the acting deputy commissioner of the FAA, Monty Belger. And you have Bob Kerry of the 9/11 Commission basically saying, you had untrained staff, and meanwhile, they're trying to relay information to NORAD, and they don't know what's going on because the top management isn't there helping them. And he's like screaming at him, why isn't there any help? Why didn't, people at the FAA help this one person out? And Monty Belger's like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know.
Yeah, right? This was their training.
Right, exactly. This was it. This was it. But again, if you look at it, how do you train for multiple hijackings? We never had that before.
Right.
So that's new to them. So at the same time, like I said, when you have all these like blips on the screen causing confusion for people at the FAA, it also relates to confusion at NORAD at the same time. So in other words, that nothing really nefarious was going on except at the highest levels. If you want to say that they put these exercises so that the planes wouldn't interfere, that sounds about right, because you don't have to let anybody else know about that.
Right.
You just have to, they just basically are saying, yeah, we don't know what's going on. So yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of those things that I look at and I'm like, man, that's so odd. It's just so, like I said, it's too coincidental to be a coincidence at that point.
Yeah, right.
It's so weird. And I'm trying to look at it. Like I said earlier, I've heard a lot of people speculate on the intelligence agencies being involved and this, that, and the other, Bush being involved. But I'm like, no one, I've never really heard anybody dig into the idea that there was somebody on the inside, just one person feeding information to Al-Qaeda so that Al-Qaeda knew when to run the operation, because it was just too good to be true. If they just guessed, it's like, that's like that's like getting struck by lightning twice, it's like, it's just not, you caught lightning in a bottle there. So it's just a very, very strange situation to look at when you look at what was going on that morning and just how everything lined up.
Yeah, right.
Well, there's all kinds of other things, and some of this we're going to touch on during the episode I want to do on the mythology around it, and where we talk about like kind of debunk some of the lies that go around it. So I don't know how much further we want to go into anomalies. Are we missing any that you feel like are really important?
No, these are the most important anomalies relating to 9/11. Now you have other anomalies that aren't as egregious in importance, like as important as these, but these are just some of the major anomalies that are basically covered up by the more fringe, and also reasonable speculations that we talked about that aren't proven, but where there's smoke, there is fire. So these are reasonable speculations that are often blanketed by the unreasonable speculations that we probably could spend the next 5 hours speaking on.
Right.
I know I could, but
I want to ask you this, because this is something I was thinking about earlier when we were talking. In 1993, Al-Qaeda successfully was able to get a van with a fertilizer bomb into one of the basements of one of the towers. That was the North Tower, right?
Right, but they weren't Al-Qaeda.
Well, right, they weren't Al-Qaeda, but it was basically the same people.
Radical fundamentalists.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you make of the possibility? Because you hear a lot of stuff about people planting bombs. What do you make of the possibility that they were able to infiltrate the basements before the planes crashed? And so they were able to set up bombs in the basement and then have the plane crashes. So you had like a dual attack. You had the attack from the top and the bottom all at the same time that created this.
Yeah, this is another reasonable speculation I entertain from time to time. Not as important as the other anomalies we talked about, but definitely something that I consider here and there. And so, why do I consider these? Well, there's a report from MSNBC News, and his reporter, his name was Rick Sanchez, and he basically said that he was told by New York police that they found a white van in the North Tower that was packed with explosives. And I could say that maybe this was a false report, maybe there was a misreport. Did it come from a third-hand source? Because there was also a misreport involving George Washington Bridge. And certain people actually did believe it, that there was a truck filled with explosives that were going to bomb the George Washington Bridge. But this was spread by Marcia Kramer and Dan Rather, two more prominent reporters. But that turned out to be false, that came from third-hand sources. They weren't there at the George Washington Bridge. Rick Sanchez was actually at Ground Zero, and he actually got that information from a cop. So, like, unlike Dan Rather and Marshall Kramer, who were in the studio, and that they were hearing from third-hand sources about a misreport that they, heard from. And believe me, on September 11, 2001, I'm pretty sure that the New York Police Department got inundated with many false calls.
Yeah, no doubt.
So many. I can only imagine, the paranoia, the fear, and, this Arab is looking at me or something.
Well, there
like that.
There was a guy. There's a video out there, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it's a black gentleman who was in one of the towers, and the fire department kept coming to rescue him, and then they kept backing up. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Ken Jennings is his name.
Is that his name? And he talks about hearing explosions from below, like underneath his feet.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like, has there been any evidence to suggest that he is telling the truth or lying? I don't know anything about the guy other than this video. So,
well, there was an interview he did with I think it was don't hold me to it. I think it was National Geographic, where there was a film and he was a part of it, and he basically changed his story. Well, he was interviewed by Loose Change, I think it was Loose Change, where he talked about that there was when he was going down the stairs to get out of the building, the stairs basically blew out from under him,
right,
and that he couldn't go down anymore because the stairs were missing. And that when he finally got out of the building, he was stepping up. The fireman that was helping him said, "Don't look down," because when he was looking down, there was a whole bunch of dead bodies, and that he was stepping over people. But when he did the interview with National Geographic, he didn't mention any of this before. And so Loose Change ran with the story that, basically changed the story because he was threatened. Well, whether he was threatened or not, I can't say, because I don't know whether he was threatened or not. So it's unproven. But Ken Jennings did die. He managed to die of leukemia. His son actually wrote on a viral media board about his death. And, I have his obituary in one of my files. And, a lot of the, fringe conspiracy theorists basically said he was killed. Well, he wasn't the only one to report this. We do have other people in World Trade Center 1 and 2 that actually on the day of September 11th were interviewed and basically said that while they were in basement levels 2 and 3, and that's the garage level, basement levels,
right,
that they heard explosions. And the 9/11 NIST, I think it was NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, basically said that when the planes entered the buildings, the jet fuel came down all the way down through the elevator shafts. Now, that much is true, but to cause an explosion in the bottom levels of the World Trade Center, well, how the hell did that happen? I'm sorry, but there were other reports too, even before the plane hit, that they heard explosions. William Rodriguez is one of them. He's a maintenance guy that was actually involved with the World Trade Center in the 1993 World Trade Center bomb. And so he actually does the lectures all the time, saying that he heard explosions even before the plane had even hit. And he's not the only one.
right.
So we do have people that were interviewed by the legacy media on the day of 9/11 coming out in dust, basically saying that, yeah, we heard explosions in the basement levels.
There were, I mean, if I remember correctly, and I could be misremembering because it was a long time ago, but I believe, weren't there like firemen and policemen that were actually interviewed that were saying similar things?
Yeah, but now Dr. Graham McQueen, he's actually involved with certain members of the 9/11 scientific community. He did a study on, and he read all the reports of the EMS and fire department who did their oral histories report, which was taken by, I think, the fire department. And I forgot the name of the person who interviewed them, but he wanted to keep their memories fresh about what happened on the day.
Right.
So he created this archive, and it was over 900 interviews he conducted called the Oral Histories of 9/11. And according to Graham McQueen, there was I think it was 200 firemen that basically, who survived, who basically said that, I'm sorry, it was over 100. It was over 100 people, firemen, that basically said that at some point during, whether they were in the South Tower and the North Tower, that they heard explosions. Now, does that mean that it was a bomb that went off, or was it from a generator? Was it from some electric outlet?
Right.
Was it from a car that was burning because we have burning debris that was falling into the parking garages outside the World Trade Center and blocks away? Because the Trade Center is 100 stories tall. You have burning debris that was just falling into midair, landing in the streets 4 blocks away. So a lot of these cars that were on fire, and you don't know where the explosions coming from, but it doesn't mean that what they heard may have come from a bomb. So it's hard to say how much of those explosions they heard were basically from a number of different other things, or was it from an incendiary device?
Right.
So, the only thing that's missing is a fireman seeing an incendiary device or a bomb, but we don't have any reports of that.
Gotcha.
So I would say be careful with that. Don't dismiss it, but don't necessarily mean that it's from bombs itself.
Yeah, my thing is that because of 1993 or Oklahoma City or any of these other things, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that a bomb got planted, as well as there's plenty of video evidence to show planes crashing into the World Trade Centers. What we don't know is what was going on underground, if there was an opportunity for them to breach the security and get a van full of a fertilizer bomb to a beam, right? Because they barely missed the first time.
Right. They almost took it down the first time. Now, this is one area I don't concentrate on. I get a lot of criticism for this. Oh, why don't you talk about World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7? And I'll tell you the truth, is that I'm not qualified to speak.
Why don't you talk about what? I'm sorry.
No, why don't I talk about World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 and how they came down? And my answer is I'm not qualified to speak on it. I can give you my opinion, but my opinion means nothing in the face of a more qualified speaker on who's studying this area. Now, one of my the first interview I've ever conducted for the Darkened Hour happened to be David Chandler. And this is his area of expertise. And I like David Chandler. I respect him. And he basically talked about what happened at the World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. And basically, I was like a fish out of water. I had no question, but thank goodness my co-researcher, Richard Cox, he had all the questions. I had nothing for him because I'm like, wow, what could I basically ask him? I'm so woefully inadequate in regards to what I can ask him. He's a guy who teaches, at a college, about physics and engineering. So I'm clearly not qualified to speak on this matter. However, it's what he said to me afterwards that resonated with me. He said, even if you don't believe the World Trade Center came down from bombs or from an incendiary device or by thermite or super thermite, whatever, right? He goes, one thing you have to say is that those towers had to come down. And I remember saying that, why does it need to come down? He goes, because let's just say hypothetically, the towers actually stood. What does that mean? And I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And he says, it would mean this. Symbolically, it would mean, hey, we took your best shot. And it would revigorate pride in the American consciousness. Hey, our biggest buildings, the biggest, tallest building in the United States, the foundation of money, the foundation of power, stood against, terror, against evil. And now it's our turn. We'll rebuild and it's our turn, but they'll stand. But with the towers coming down in such a spectacular fashion, in such it demoralized the consciousness of the American people into saying that we can get to you and get to your biggest, safest structures on the face of the earth anytime, anywhere. And if we could destroy them, we could destroy you. And so that created this air of demoralization within the public consciousness. And I said, that really resonated with me because I live in New York. And I can tell you right now, before 9/11, we were very cocky. It wasn't that we were better than you. It was just that, we're the oldest city, we're very proud of ourselves. Even my accent, I hate my accent, by the way. It makes me sound like a 2-bit gangster or something. My vowels are pronounced, but no, it's just that we have we're very outgoing. But
I love New York. I love New Yorkers. Like driving a truck over the road when I'd go to New York, man, I had some of my best conversations. I love the people in New York. Like, so don't feel bad, dude.
Right. No, but
I always enjoyed going up there because it's like I don't have time to bullshit with you.
Right.
But I'm gonna bullshit with you for the time I have.
Yeah, for sure. I got you. But I could say with confidence right now that after September 11, 2001, before I moved in 2003, that air of confidence and bravado disappeared that day, and it never returned.
Yeah,
it never returned. So that's why I tend to believe that. Yeah, I think World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 did come down from explosives or by some type of incendiary device. But do I know it? No, because that's not my area of study. And I've always been about the who's and the what's in terms of true crime. So that's why I studied, who these people were, the intelligence services. And so that's my area of study. So I'm telling you the truth. It's not that I'm dodging the question. Go talk to David Chandler, Wayne Costi, Ken Jenkins. Those guys are experts.
Right.
Adam Taylor. I've had these guys on the show. Ross Muir, for example. I had these guys on the show because they knew what they were talking about. Scientifically, I don't know what I'm talking about in regards to that. And that's just me being honest.
Right.
Would you rather hear an opinion based on nothing, or would you rather hear information based on study and years of study and evidence? Yeah, I would rather hear, stuff that, people know what they're talking about because they study that area.
Well, I'm going to make you mad because I want to talk about Building 7 for a second.
I knew it.
I do, because, all right, when it comes to anomalies, this is one of the biggest anomalies of the entire thing. All right. So what happened is 1 came down, 2 came down. And then how many hours later was it? It was quite a few hours later that 7.
Yeah, 5:20 when the World Trade Center.
So it was in the evening. Yeah. So it was 8 hours later, something like that. All right.
Yeah.
So when you're what is it that we are told, like we're supposed to believe about World Trade Center 7?
Well, we are told about what happened.
Well, all right. So yeah, no, what I'm asking is like no plane hit World Trade Center 7. World Trade Center 7 was actually a much shorter building, right? It wasn't near as tall as the other 2. Am I correct on that?
I want to say it was 44, 46 stories tall.
And the other ones were like over 100 stories.
110.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a shorter building. In the 93 bombing, the whole goal was to topple one building over into another, right? Was there debris falling from like the north or south tower hitting 7? Like what was going on there?
So
because
yeah,
there really wasn't any coverage until it came down, and it was like, oh, okay, what happened?
right. So what happened was, and this is coming from, I'm not making this up. So the fire department, fire chiefs, were actually called to testify, and this is something that you won't know. Not many people know because it wasn't a big deal. After the 9/11 attacks, there was a civil suit brought by the tenants of World Trade Center 7 against Con Edison, which is the electrical utilities company here in New York. And because Con Edison had built a generator at the bottom of World Trade Center 7, which they say helped facilitate the collapse of the building. So what happened was the tenants basically sued Con Ed, and they actually defense lawyers.
How did they? I'm sorry. How do they believe it helped facilitate the collapse?
Because the generator basically exploded, I think, and caused damage to the World
So
Trade Center 7.
okay, so down at it caused foundational damage that.
Yes, and
Okay.
which led to the collapse of the building.
Gotcha.
So, but and they complained about this generator for years, saying it was unsafe or whatnot. So it came back to bite them in the rear. But anyway, a number of fire chiefs were called to testify. People like Frank Carruthers and Daniel Negro. I forgot the other famous one, but there was like 7 of them that took hold to testify.
Okay.
And they all testified saying that when they surveyed the building, World Trade Center 7, in the early afternoon, they were looking to see, because they couldn't get water lines because the water line was destroyed when World Trade Center 1, 2 had collapsed. It destroyed the water lines underneath the ground. So they basically couldn't put out the fires in World Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 7, why was World Trade Center 7 on fire? Because World Trade Center 1 and 2, burning debris kept landing on it, and debris kept landing on 7. So you have like this one in the south face of the World Trade Center 7. Basically, it was this huge gash between floors, like I think was floors 10 to like 20. It was 10 floors, like bottom, like this lower gash at the southwest corner.
There's like a piece of debris that just like cut through it,
just
basically.
dragged right through.
Yeah.
Dragged right through it. Well, on the top of World Trade Center 7, there was like this long, like 20-story gash that was created by other parts of debris that landed from, I think, the South Tower. So that's what created the damage, the structural damage, as well as the fires that were raging in, like, I think it was like 17 to 20 floors of the World Trade Center 7. But these were untreated fires because the water couldn't get there.
Right.
So these fire chiefs surveyed the building. And when they surveyed the building, they basically testified to the fact that they were hearing the building listing. In other words, the building was actually moving back and forth because the structural integrity was compromised. And the fires also were adding to the weakening of the steel. Now, I'm not saying that bombs could have been blown off at when the World Trade Center 1, 2 came down, because you wouldn't be able to hear it, right? That would be a good time when the bombs go off, compromising the security of the building. And also, too, there was nobody in World Trade Center 7 at the time because it was evacuated. So by the time World Trade Center 1, 2 and came down, and the damage was already done, and even if you want to speculate that the bombs went off when the World Trade Centers were collapsing and caused more structural damage, which led to the building listing, that very well could be the case. I don't know. I'm just saying. But anyway, when the fire chiefs were called to testify, that's what they said, that they heard the building listing, that the fires were raging, and they set up, they went to the command center, which was outside World Trade Center 7, because the command center at the time was in the entrance into the South Tower. And when that was destroyed, they had no command center.
Right.
And every incident has to have a command center, no matter what.
Right.
So they built a command center outside of World Trade Center 7. And so they got together and they said, all right, let's build a collapse perimeter because the building's going to collapse. We couldn't get to the fires. So with the fringe, you've heard this theory that, BBC reported the building coming down. Meanwhile, it didn't. Well, Jane Stanley, the reporter who
what was it? Like they report it and then like 30 seconds later it drops or something. Some shit like that.
They reported, I think, 20 minutes before it collapsed.
That's what it was. 20 minutes
Yeah,
before.
it was like
Because you can still see it in the background. Yeah,
you can see like even I was like, oh, wait a minute, it's still standing. But Jane Stanley actually did a follow-up video and basically saying she wasn't there in New York, so she's trying to get reports on the ground. And what she got was the reports from the fire chiefs that the building was in danger of collapse. So the BBC, of course, wants to be like every other agency. Oh, we're going to give you the first update.
Yeah, breaking news. Yeah,
breaking news. So World Trade, they called it the Salmon Brothers building. That's what it's called. World Trade Center 7 didn't collapse in time, and it did collapse later. So remember too that the word on the ground, all around Ground Zero at the time, was World Trade Center 7 was going to collapse.
Right.
And that's what the fire chiefs basically testified in the it's called Con Ed versus Aegis Incorporated, AEGIS.
I remember hearing about this. Yeah.
Go look. Yeah. For the listeners, if you want to know more about it, go look up Con Ed versus Aegis Incorporated, and you'll get the whole files, and you'll see the fire chiefs basically testifying, that, hey, yeah, we heard the building listing and it was on fire, and we saw the structural integrity weakening the building, and we made a collapse perimeter.
Yeah, and the reason I ask you about it is not because I think you're an engineer or anything like that. It's just because all of the narratives you hear around Building 7 is just like, oh, well, 20 minutes beforehand, they were saying it had collapsed. Blah, 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 and you're like, okay, like, what does that mean? And there's also this story. I don't know if you've heard this. The owner of the building was having some issues financially or with the insurance or something like that. And he to get a payoff. And so he took advantage of the situation with the first 2 World Trade Centers going down and decided to wire it with demolition and blow it up, and it fell into its own footprint. And, that only happens, whatever. You hear all of these things, but those are the dominant narratives, right?
Yeah.
That's all you hear.
It's a huge narrative. So the proprietor you're talking about is Larry Silverstein, or as some people in the fringe community call him, Lucky Larry Silverstein. I wouldn't disagree with Lucky, by the way, because he wasn't supposed to be where he was on September 11, 2000.
Yeah, possible that he was lucky. Yeah,
right.
So, but I'm not going to argue that.
Yeah, exactly. He's supposed to be having breakfast. He always has breakfast at Windows of the World, which is the top of the North Tower, the restaurant on top of the North Tower. And it just so happened on September 11, 2001, his wife, according to him, basically said, "Don't forget your dermatologist appointment." And basically went to his dermatologist appointment before he went for breakfast. And it just so happened that he missed out on being at the top of the North Tower on September 11, 2001. Now, I'm not here to protect Silverstein. I think he's suspicious as heck. He's actually friendly with...
Who is he?
He's actually the proprietor who bought out the rights to rent World Trade Centers 1, 2, and he's the owner of 7. So... in 2001, basically, Port Authority, who owns the land and the World Trade Center complex, held a bid for new rentals for the World Trade Center complex. And Silverstein put in a bid, but it wasn't enough. He actually lost his bid to a company called Vernalda Realty, who basically outbid him initially in April of 2001. But however, Vernalda Realty basically pulled out because there was a contractual dispute about insurance. And so they basically pulled out. So the default winner was Silverstein Properties. But Silverstein actually was helped along, I forgot the name of the person who actually gave him an additional couple of million to rent and lease.
Probably Donald Rumsfeld. What's a couple of million out of 2.3 trillion?
No, yeah. No, it was actually somebody. I usually have this guy's name, but I can't remember. But he actually helped out in financing, helping with the financing of Silverstein Properties World Trade Center 7. However, in August of 2001, the lawyers for Silverstein Properties basically said, like responsible lawyers would do with a billion, hundreds of $1 million on the line, basically had all types of insurance, and one of them was terrorism insurance. Now, I always hear the outrage. Oh, in August of 2001, weeks before 9/11, this big conspiracy of him taking terrorism insurance before 9/11 happened. Well, it's not a big deal, and I'll tell you why. Because who wouldn't put terrorism insurance on a building that was once a prior victim of terrorism, that has always been a target of terrorism according to terrorism threat reports,
Right.
and also too, if you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars into a building that was under a terrorist attack once, it would behoove you to take terrorism insurance because that building has always been a target for terrorism. And so, yeah, the timing is suspicious as fuck, but that's about it. I wouldn't say it's, this is a conviction against Silverstein. Not to mention, when the attacks happened and the towers were destroyed, Silverstein tried to get double the insurance, saying that World Trade Center 1 and 2 were separate attacks. And the courts basically struck that down and said, no, it was one terrorist attack that destroyed 2 buildings, and they were awarded $4.6 billion in terrorism insurance. Now, he didn't pocket all that money. All of that money actually went to, every dollar, by the way, went to the rebuilding of the entire World Trade Center complex. Incidentally enough, One World Trade Center, which is the biggest building of the complex, Larry Silverstein had to give up property rights to that building because he couldn't afford the rest of the reconstruction project. And basically, he got sued by the workers, the construction workers, because he wasn't paying them on time because he didn't have enough money to do so. So when I hear about these conspiracies involving Silverstein, him making billions of dollars, no, he lost millions of dollars. He became lesser for it because he had to give up the property rights to One World Trade Center. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not suspicious, because I happen to think, and this is not, take this with a grain of salt because it's speculation, I happen to think that he got forewarning not to be there on September 11, 2001, because every day, like I said, he would have breakfast at the Windows of the World restaurant, and it just so happened on that day itself, he wasn't there. So whether Netanyahu told him because he's friends with him, or maybe somebody in Israeli intelligence told him, you'll never know, because we don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, suspicious? Yes. Is he a criminal? No.
That we know of.
Yeah, that we know.
That we can prove.
And even if you want to say, and also I would behoove if I didn't mention this as well. World Trade Center 7. He gave an interview once to PBS saying that, there was such terrible loss of life. He was talking to a fire chief. He was, the next thing we decided was to pull it. And then we watched the building come down. Well, what does he mean by that? Is he saying that, hey, we were going to pull the building, basically bringing it down by improvised devices? Well, let's just say that's true. Nobody got killed. Nobody died. The building was evacuated. So what crime did he commit? Well, did he commit an insurance crime? Yeah, sure. If you could prove it, go right ahead. Go into courts. Sue Larry Silverstein for insurance fraud. You don't think that was an incident, that was something that was in the minds of many people? Well, it's 2022, and nothing has happened to Silverstein. Or did he mean to pull the rest of the firefighters out who were surveying the building, which I told you I mentioned with the fire chiefs that were surveying the building, right, saying that, it's basically don't save the building, just let it come down.
Well, if the fire department's already going in there and they're already saying there's irreparable structural damage, this building's going to come down, wouldn't the responsible thing to do be go in there and do controlled demolition to bring it down properly, as opposed to having it fall all willy-nilly and do who knows what kind of damage to the area around there?
Right. So they interviewed a couple of years ago.
I
There
mean,
was an interview.
I'm just saying
Right.
that
No, no, no. I
even
get
if
what
they
you're saying.
brought in the bombs at
Right.
some point in time, it might have been the most responsible action to take. It's like if you have a horse with a broken leg and the horse is 12 years old and you know the leg's not going to heal properly, are you going to torture the horse by keeping it alive for another 3 years with a leg that never heals? Or are you going to put the horse down? Like sometimes you have to count your losses.
Right. So in terms of demolition, there's a protocol where you have to go to the governor of New York and basically and get permission to basically, especially for something that's in New York City itself. And even though Silverstein owned that building, that's the only building he owned. He would have to go through the protocols and get permission to basically
And was that De
implode his own building.
Blasio at that? Who's the governor at that time?
No, the Pataki, George Pataki.
Pataki.
The mayor was Rudy Giuliani.
Giuliani was the mayor. Yeah.
So they have to get through protocols. So in other words, when he was told by the fire chiefs, when they made that decision, it was already mid-afternoon. So they had until mid-afternoon till I don't know how long it takes to wire a building, but I was going to mention this. Years ago in 2000, I want to say 6 or 7, there was an interview with a Dutch demolition expert. His name was Danny Jowenko. And a lot of these 9/11 truthers love to mention him because they take his words out of context and basically say, oh, when World Trade Center 7 collapsed, he was shown it. And he was shown the video and he says, oh, yeah, that's a controlled demolition. That's controlled. Everything looked about it looks like controlled demolition. And when the guy basically said what the truthers don't show him, what they don't show you on the video is that the guy saying, oh, yeah, this happened on September 11, 2001. And then Jowenko says, really? He goes, that happened on 2001? And he goes, it would have been very, very hard. He goes, and then he says, all right, tell me how. He goes, well, while the building's on fire, they would have to go to the heart of the building. And he showed you this, he drew this outline of where the core was for World Trade Center 7. And he drew a portion, what he called the heart of the area of what cores to be compromised.
Right.
And he said that in other words, you don't have to have bombs. He goes, all you needed was this device where they would compromise the core structure. And I forgot the name of the device. It would basically eat into the core and basically melt the concrete using I forgot the name of it. That's killing me. But it wasn't an explosion. So it basically would wrap around these core columns. And I think there was 12, he mentioned 12 or 16 of them. And they wrap around these while the building's on fire, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, it's not impossible to do, he said, but it would take a couple of hours to do so under those conditions. So who's to say that didn't happen? Because that would make sense. And
right.
Here's a demolition saying that, yeah, it's not impossible. It would have been very hard to do. But what truthers don't tell you is that he doesn't think World Trade Centers 1 and 2 were controlled demolitions.
Yeah.
Because he says that controlled demolitions start from the bottom. You compromise the bottom, the building just falls, collapses, and it's shut.
Right.
Yeah. He goes, that didn't happen in World Trade Centers 1 and 2.
Absolutely. I've never heard anybody make the argument that World Centers 1 and 2 were controlled demolition. And I know that argument is out there because I've heard you talk about people talking about holograms and this, that, and the other. So I know the argument is out there, but I've never heard it. So that's not an argument I've ever run across.
I wouldn't put the collapses. I want to make this distinction too, because I want to be honest. Like the people who believe World Trade Center 1, 2 collapses, I wouldn't put them in the same onus as the hologram people, for example. Like David Chandler and Tony Zambati and Niels Harrod, I wouldn't say are irrational. Wayne Costi, Ken Jenkins, Ross Muir, I wouldn't say they're irrational, but I would definitely say that the people, the holograms, are definitely irrational. So I would trust them to an extent. I wish I knew what they were talking about because to them it's for me it's like Sanskrit. Like I'm intimidated when they talk. Like Wayne Cosby showed me a paper once. It was like 27 pages, and I was looking. I said, "Wow, this is fucking brilliant." Hate to curse, but I was like, "Wow,
No
I don't know what
cuss.
I'm reading
Like
here."
I
Yeah,
curse all the time, so
yeah.
please.
I'm sorry, but I like to be a little bit, But yeah, when I
Yeah, but
read his
this is
paper,
year zero. This isn't,
yeah,
the
I
darkened
know what
hour.
you're saying. I know. No, no, no. I get you. But no, like reading those papers, like you could tell it's not from an irrational point of view. He's using science to prove his case, but that's not the case with hologram people. So I
Right,
just
right,
wanted to
right, right.
bring that distinction up.
Yeah,
So
no, that's fair. I've never. I guess I just haven't been. I haven't dug deep enough to like encounter those
right.
arguments. I don't know. I don't really have anything else on anomalies unless you have something else. Well,
No,
do you
we
want
covered.
to? Do you want to like talk the passports? Because I know that's something that people throw out.
Okay, yeah, I'm very glad you brought this up too. There's another anomaly that basically is attributed to the fringe aspects, and I'll tell you why it's not too surprising. Um, in when World Trade Center, when Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower, there was a passport that was found that was soaked in jet fuel in Lower Manhattan, and it was actually picked up by a passerby who gave it to a cop, and the cop brought it to Secret Service and I'm sorry, not Secret Service, the FBI. And basically, this passport belonged to Saddam al-Saskami. Now, the fringe conspiracy is saying, oh, you see, that passport could have been planted by anybody, and basically wanted to prove that these were hijackers on these planes.
Hmm.
Well, let's just say that that's true. Well, they made a mistake because if you're going to attribute hijackers with Iraq, well, why didn't they say that this hijacker was from Iraq and not from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which
Right.
would basically show that there was a connection with these muscle hijackers coming from Saudi Arabia, which they were.
Yeah.
Also, too, there was a passport that was found in Shanksville, the bird passport of Ziad Jarrah. There was a bird passport found at the Pentagon belonging to Khalid al-Midar. Okay, but that wasn't the only things that were found. There were ID cards found in Shanksville. One of them was the ID card of C.C. Lyles, who's a flight attendant on board Flight 93. There was an ID card belonging to a Florida cab driver. I don't know his name, but that was found in Shanksville. And what I'm saying is paper, light things can survive a plane impact. Paper can survive. The first thing you saw when the planes hit the World Trade Center, what you see lingering in the air?
Paper.
Right. So what I'm saying is all you need to do is, put two and two together regarding physics. Heavier objects are not going to survive, but lighter objects will. Paper, for example. In other words, when a plane hit the building, you see this massive explosion. Well, what's going to explode out of the airplane? Well, paper. Basically, all the lighter objects that are not, at the front of the airplane, with the weight smashing into the initial point of the plane into the object, which is the building. So when the explosion happened afterward, it's pushing outwards. And what's it pushing out? All the lighter objects that were on the plane. Also Boeing planes are made out of nylon. And that was found on the lower streets of Manhattan as well as the Pentagon. So it's not that hard to find.
They're making planes out of nylon.
Well, part of the Boeing airplanes, Boeing 757-222 series, are made out of plexiglass and nylon, which protects the insulation of the plane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I just always assumed they were like fiberglass and steel, like a car. It's like
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the outside of the plane is aluminum alloy, and there's steel protecting certain parts of the plane. But most of the plane, it can't be heavy because the plane has to fly, and not many heavy objects.
Yeah, I'm a truck driver. I never thought that much about it.
Yeah, that's all right. But yeah, these are things that often go ignored or not understood, and basically can get misconstrued and whatnot.
I figured if I could just put wings on my fucking 18-wheeler, it would fly.
There you go. I thought it worked like that,
That's what I thought. It was like, what is it? I have to hit 88 miles per hour or something like that. Yeah.
But it's funny because when I looked into these anomalies, I had to learn all these things.
Right.
Why did a passport survive? What was the plane made out of? Right. So I had to learn all these things along with my studies of 9/11. It's funny because when you study 9/11, you wouldn't think to study the outline of a plane, how it's built, or like, why did paper did survive? Why did
Right,
these passports
right,
survive?
exactly.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
Yeah, I think people put a lot of they put a lot of emphasis on that one passport that was
Yeah,
covered in jet fuel because it was not damaged at all, other than the jet fuel that was on it. From what I
right,
understand,
right.
it
Yeah.
wasn't burnt or anything. So they put a lot of emphasis on that one
Mhm.
particular one, without talking about all the other pieces of passports that were partially melted and burnt, and that were all over the place.
Right.
ID cards that had burn marks on them. But like you said, it's lighter, so it's gonna blow out. I
Yeah.
mean, I live in the Gulf Coast. We go through hurricanes. Like, you'd be surprised at what survives. Like, you're like, what?
Yeah, it's funny, right?
It's like, out of
It's
all
funny.
the things that are still okay, that made it.
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah, that
yeah, I mean, the disasters have no rhyme or reason. It's all
right,
random.
exactly.
It's all random whenever it
Right.
comes to stuff like that. You
But
can't.
what happens is that when you discount the hijackers, you discount uh, the intelligence agencies and operations that were happening before the attacks took place, and that's where they exactly don't want you to look at. Right? They don't want you to look at like operations like Able Danger or the CIA's Alex Station and the withholding of information about hijackers in the United States. They don't want you to know that the Israeli Mossad had moving front companies and art student rings that were monitoring these people and what information they collect. What information did they share or didn't share? Well, we'll never know, because as long as we're not looking in these areas, well, all these people that were involved with these operations, well, they're going to get away with it. And as long as you believe in these fringe conspiracies, the ones that we talked about tonight, and not talk about the rational conspiracies, the ones we talked about tonight as well, you're not going to solve anything about 9/11. And what will happen, I fear, is going to go in the way of JFK, into the realm of oblivion. And
Right.
all those people that were involved with either complicity or foreknowledge about 9/11, well, they're going to get away with it. And
Yeah.
that's why, I make it, I'm such a, and I'm not a prude, like I don't do this to be a dick. Like, I want people to know something. I want information shared. I don't want fringe conspiracies or beliefs to be shared, because
Right.
we can't go to court with that. I want to make a difference. I want to hold people accountable. In order to do that, we got to know what happened and not believe what happened.
Yeah. For sure, man. And that's why I wanted to get into some of this stuff, because I'm like,
Sure.
as weird as some of it sounds, and we'll get into more of the lies, not next episode, but the episode after. Next episode, we're talking dancing Israelis.
You better
So-
believe it.
So we're gonna get into the
And that's a huge topic. That's
yeah,
a big
we're gonna
topic.
get
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the Israeli the Mossad cells and
Mhm.
all that. We're gonna talk about that, because I think that's something like that a lot of people overlook, because they get so wrapped up in all this other stuff. They get wrapped up in holograms and missiles, and
Right.
I mean, I've heard all kinds of stuff, man.
Mhm.
Like, I've heard that a plane didn't actually hit the Pentagon, that it was a missile
Yeah.
shot into the. I've heard that, and it's like,
Mhm.
wait, what? Like, I would think they would actually have better defenses against missiles than they would against planes.
Right, exactly.
And then you did an episode, what, 2 weeks ago with somebody, and y'all talked about that extensively, and you're like, yeah, they focus on the 14-foot hole, but they don't focus on the bottom floor.
Right.
Yeah.
I just did a video 2 days ago about Thierry Mason, and he's the originator of the 16-foot hole. And basically, because he went by the photo, which shows the fire retardant covering the whole first floor, he says that the second floor is the impact hole. And it's amazing, because so many people actually believe that to be the case, even to this day.
Really?
Yeah, it's amazing how conspiracies can live on as long as that. Meanwhile, he's not showing you the whole picture. And then, I did a critique video based on his presentation that he did with Richard Gage. of 9/11 Unleashed, and like they talk about all the fringe conspiracies involving the Pentagon. But what he didn't have on were people that were actually there who could probably tell you a thing or two of what happened.
Right. Yeah.
And
wasn't that area under construction?
Yeah, renovation project.
Yeah.
It started in 1996, and Lee Evey was the director of the Pentagon renovation project.
Yeah,
and that was the last wedge to be renovated.
Yeah, there was nobody in that area whenever the plane hit, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
There were I want to say there were only like 2 or 3 people that were injured from that impact. Am I right about that? It was a number of people that died in the impact. Oh, was it?
Yeah.
For some reason, I wanted to say that there was like a very minimal amount of people that were injured in the Pentagon attack because of where it hit. Because the construction crew wasn't on site that day for whatever reason. Am I wrong about this? Am I thinking?
No, there was 64 fatalities.
Oh wow!
So, and 56 of them were passengers. So, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. That's the plane. There was 100. All right. So there was 56 fatalities on the plane. There was 100. There was 125 that were killed in the Pentagon.
Okay.
And it was over 100. I don't know the number. It was over 100 that was injured, but it was 125 that were killed. But most of that was at the Naval Administration office. Wedge 1. In other words, Wedge 1.
Right.
The west area of the Pentagon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, man. Plug away. Darkened Hour. Go to the Darkened Hour. Listen to the Darkened Hour.
Yeah. Just Google my name, Adam Fitzgerald 9/11, or do yourself the favor.
If you're gonna play, scale, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose.
Twitter, and I have a link.